All right. Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. The date is Sunday, January 27th. I just wanted to go over a few quick things before we get started here on our discussion regarding gun control. First thing is that just to inform you, right now I am recording our conversation, and after the conversation is completed, I'm going to be posting the video to our Vonvo YouTube channel. Is something like that okay with you?
Yes.
Great. And last thing just to bring up is in case one of our audience members decides to come and participate in a discussion with you about gun control here at Vonvo, we just want our discussions to be civil, valuable, no personal attacks on anyone. Are you fine with those rules and will agree with those?
Yes.
All right, great. So then let's get started. Once again, thank you for joining me. So just for our audience members who are watching right now and anyone who to watch this conversation, would you mind just giving them a quick background about yourself, where you're from, occupation, and maybe how you got so passionate about this topic?
Well, I'm from Chicago. I'm the CFO of a distribution company here in Chicago, and my family's been personally affected by gun violence, and I've been involved with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence for the last 20 years.
Great. Uh, and so basically, when it comes to your stance, for our audience members, you want to just give them a quick, um, you know, background on what your position is relative to to this issue?
Sure. I think that we're all looking for common sense things that we can do to reduce gun violence in this country. We have a problem, and we're trying to solve it. So, whether that's specific regulations on the design, manufacture, distribution, and use of firearms, or any other ideas of uh, causes of the firearm epidemic or the violence epidemic that we have in this country.
Right. And so, where exactly do you think ultimately that this violence concern in the country or epidemic, whatever you want to call it, is a direct result of guns? Do you think that's the root cause, or is promoting this this concern throughout the country of violence?
No, really, I think it's more like gasoline on the fire. I think the root causes of violence are different, very diverse causes like economics, education, parenting. I just think that adding firearms into those situations, domestic violence comes to mind. Adding firearms in those situations is like putting gasoline on the fire.
Great. Please submit them here. So what I was going to ask next then is, in basically on the news, you hear a back and forth going on pretty often. I want to say about gun issue or mental health issue. Um, what is your stance then? Because I feel like those are like besides just like pro gun or anti gun. Then there's this middle. Then there's this new angle that people take, and I guess it's not new actually. It's just very common that people take that it's a mental health issue. How do you think that factors into the equation with this topic?
Well, first of all, let's be clear on some facts. Somewhere around 50% of all firearm deaths in this country are related to suicide, which brings in the mental health issue. Um, the mass shootings that seem to also have a mental health aspect to them are really a small part of the problem. Um, so, yeah, there's no question that would be one of the situations I'm referring to that is a root cause, and then easy access to firearms for people with mental health issues is simply like giving them gasoline to pour on a burning fire.
Right. So basically,
so we would advocate for anything that strikes at the root cause and would improve our mental health institutions and identification of mental health problems, promoting treatment improvements, as well as restricting access to dangerous products for those people with known mental illness problems.
Mm-hmm. Right. So basically, what you're saying is, and once again, just so you know, like this is one of the first gun control discussions we're having taken place. So I'm sure a lot of different figures are going to get thrown my way and other people's ways. But what you're saying is, 50% of the 50% of the suicide-related deaths, or 50% of gun control deaths relate directly to suicide. So you're saying that is a direct correlation with that mental health problem. But the shootings basically, that are going on inside Connecticut and the one that happened the few that happened in Colorado, ultimately, I mean, those are basically showing up as a minority, even though they're saying that those people had mental health issues. Those have really only been a minority of the different, gun violence crimes that have happened.
Absolutely. If you look at suicide, if you look at gang-related deaths from firearms in places like Chicago and other major metropolitan areas in the country, if you look at firearm deaths related to domestic violence, those are all much larger than mass shootings.
Great. So an individual inside the room named Larry, he asked a question inside the text chat. You can scroll down just to see how that works. But I'll read you the question that Larry asked. He says, how do you propose getting guns out of the hands of criminals? And how would people be able to protect themselves if only criminals have them?
Well, again, that's a very difficult problem due to the easy availability of guns that we've had for so long. So there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million guns out there. And so it's a very difficult thing to try to clean up. But if we can agree on some reasonable methods of limiting the amount of guns that we're continuing to pour into these communities, over time, that should have some positive effect. And then in terms of people protecting themselves, there's no disagreement that the Second Amendment gives individuals the right to have firearms for self-protection. So there would be no change to individual gun ownership for the purpose of self-protection.
Right. Now, what about in terms of how these semi-automatic and automatic weapons versus versus a lot less detrimental guns? What's your take on how that should be handled? Because I know that's a new subject also that is really starting to get hammered. Whether or not it should be these semi-automatic weapons that deserve to be banned. I mean, do you think that that's a relevant argument to be had also? And one second, I'm coming right back in 2 seconds. You go ahead.
Okay. I do think that's a relevant argument, but let's put it in perspective. It's a very small part of the overall problem. As far as which guns contribute to deaths and injuries the most, it is far and away handguns that are the problem.
Okay. So basically, would you mind just sharing exactly what, if you know them, the statistics with that? Because I mean, that's new to hear to me. Basically, handguns by far are causing a majority of these gun violence, crimes versus the lot more aggressive weapons that are out there on the market for people to purchase.
Yes, and I would refer you to the CDC statistics, um, Center for Disease Control, that tracks that sort of thing. But that brings up one proposal that is out there, and that is allowing the CDC to gather more information about deaths and injuries from firearms. They have been restricted from doing that in the past.
Right. So, do you think that I mean, you hear people on Piers Morgan's been attacking this issue recently. So you're saying that basically it's a majority handguns that are causing these different casualties. So do you think that they're really because majority of these casualties are coming from these less detrimental weapons, that the semi-automatic ones you're fine with those staying out on the market for people to purchase? Because there are times where people are purchasing weapons that are used by Marines and people in the Army, correct? Like there are certain weapons that people are able to purchase right now at Walmart that are very similar in nature to that sort of amount of effect, or the aggression that can come from those sorts of weapons. So do you think that those really can stay legal to purchase on the market? You don't have a problem with those?
Well, no, I'm not saying that, Max. What I'm trying to say is that that particular issue is kind of like splitting hairs. It's not a major part of the problem, and no matter how we define it, it's only going to be a small number of firearms that are actually restricted, when compared to all of the handguns that are out there. And no matter how you define those things, there are always ways around the definition, and the gun manufacturers simply adapt. So I'm just saying that that's kind of a fringe part of the argument. But I would support looking at where we draw the line. Okay, we draw the line today at anything that's considered a military weapon. So you can't have truly automatic weapons. Machine guns are banned. And wherever we draw the line, I would be open to looking at that and restricting more guns that have no legitimate civilian purpose, if that would affect reducing gun violence. But if it's not going to reduce gun violence, I'm not really interested.
Right. So where basically do you want to see, more of a line drawn currently today? Obviously here at Vonvo, we like to, drive the idea of also like solutions. So, maybe we can turn the conversation towards that. When it comes to the line, however gray you want to call it, drawing a line where you say there's no machine guns allowed, okay? So that's pretty black and white, it seems like, right? So where else, do you think that there needs to be some more black and white lines drawn, to really help shape this issue and help, restrict the amount of casualties that, occur in this country about it?
Well, I think if we continue to focus on banning different types of weapons, we'll be chasing our tails for a long time. I think that what we need to focus on is improving safety regulations over the design, manufacture, distribution, and use of firearms, all firearms. So we have safety regulations over almost every other dangerous product that we allow in this country that are stronger than the regulations on firearms.
Can you elaborate on that? I just want to hear exactly how that works.
Well, one example is automobiles. We got fed up with the deaths and injuries on the roads, and particularly with young people when they were learning how to drive, and So we tightened up the regulations over the design, manufacture, distribution, and use of automobiles until the deaths and injuries from automobiles came down. And I think for a while it was less than firearms. Now I think it's kind of neck and neck with firearm-related deaths and injuries. But the point is we can have an impact if we have an honest conversation about what we can do with dangerous products that we allow in this country, and how to make things safer overall. It's not an individual argument. It's what is good public policy that increases the safety of all of us in the community.
Right. Right.
So with the automobile, specific examples that come to mind are speed limits. Okay, Mothers Against Drunk Driving was very successful in getting restrictions on intoxicated drivers and increasing the penalties for driving drunk, and changing the culture so that people don't drive drunk as much as they used to. That's really what needs to happen here. Legislation is one way to affect public policy, but the solution is really in changing the public mindset more towards safety than gun rights.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I want to continue looking at this because I think it's really interesting. So you bring up speed limits, you bring up drunk driving. These were obviously different rules, regulations that got passed over time. So obviously those things weren't just solved overnight, which I guess you have to take that sort of approach as well with this at the same time, correct? What I was going to ask is, knowing that, what would be some new, immediate sort of regulations that you think would begin to enhance the idea of safety, whether it's pre or post a purchase of a gun? I guess maybe it's more relevant. Well, they're both relevant, but I guess I'm curious. Can you go over some of these different safety precautions that we might want to take a better look at to help, make sure that guns get in the right people's hands and not the wrong people's hands?
Well, we can talk about a few of them, just off the top of my head, but I would refer you to WhiteHouse.gov and President Obama's entire plan of proposals that I think I agree with every single one of those that would have an impact. I think the one of the most effective would be a truly universal background check on the purchase of every gun. Right now we have loopholes in the distribution of firearms that allow people that we all agree shouldn't have guns, they can easily get them.
Legally. Can you explain how that works? How is that? What exactly? You always hear about tax loopholes and stuff. Can you go over what a gun control loophole looks like or sounds like?
Yeah. The Brady Law requires background checks on all sales from a federally licensed firearms dealer. However, I've seen estimates that as much as 40% of all firearm sales go through what's considered private sales, so non-federally licensed dealers. And a lot of that happens at gun shows. So a private citizen can go to a gun show and sell firearms to another private citizen without a background check.
Okay.
Also, the background check itself, I've heard arguments that the database that's used for background checks is not complete. So, in other words, mentally ill people are not in the database. All of the criminal activity from police jurisdictions around the country is not getting in the database. So the background check itself has loopholes.
Right. Okay. No, makes sense. And so, I guess what then I would ask would be, I mean, it's going to be interesting as we continue to have, people come on to Vonvo to discuss this. Um, there's going to be those who are completely anti-guns, and then I feel like there's going to be people. I'm getting the sense just from, like I said, first gun violence conversation, you seem to be more middle ground on this topic, where it doesn't seem like you are totally against, guns like being outlawed, right? You're just saying that there are clearly measures that are overdue to be taken on this matter that are probably years outdated at this point. Is that really what your whole argument probably comes down to in most?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that statement, and I would sum it up kind of like by simply saying, if we treated firearms as dangerous products and took a step back from all of the vitriol that's been going on for the last 50 years and look at it as dangerous products that we need to increase public safety and reduce the damage and the cost that these dangerous products are incurring on our communities, I think we can have a reasonable conversation and come up with some solutions that both sides can agree with. And I would also say that this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. The problem is different depending on different communities. Mm-hmm. One of the simplest distinctions to think about is rural versus urban. Okay.
Keep going.
Violence with firearms in a rural community is much different than violence with firearms in an urban community. So any kind of regulations that we're talking about would need to be flexible and customizable to the community. If we try to have a one-size-fits-all, we're going to be debating this forever.
Right. No, and I mean, I think that's definitely a valid point. I mean, one, it doesn't seem like you can just solve, first off, an item like this overnight. Two, if you try, blanketing everyone with this one size fits all, solution, and not really break it down. I mean, so therefore, like when you think about that, does that mean that your idea would probably be like it's a state by state issue in terms of what should and shouldn't be passed? I mean, should there be oversight from the federal government in terms of what, let's say, safety precautions were to be passed? How do you think that should be handled? Because I mean, you're bringing up a bunch of different interesting points that I think are really worth tackling. How do you go about that when you have urban versus rural? Does that really boil down to state by states determining how a solution fits their area?
Yes, I think there is all for overall federal public policy, which would give guidance to the gun industry in terms of how it could improve public safety. But as far as state by state goes, I think it's even more precise than that. For example, New York just passed some safety regulations, and they vary between the area around New York City and the rest of the state. We have a similar dichotomy in Illinois. The issue is different in Chicago than it is in southern Illinois. And so these regulations need to be flexible to accommodate the nature of the problem in different parts of a state.
Right. I just want to address another thing that I saw Larry mention in the text. I just want to see if there was there a question there. Tim, I would propose increasing the severity of penalties against those who commit crimes with firearms rather than limiting the size of magazines to law-abiding citizens. criminals will never have a problem obtaining these weapons. Okay, so I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to read that. Is that something that you agree or disagree with?
Yeah, I saw that, and I think about that in a couple of different ways. First is as far as limiting magazines go. Again, it's a very small part of the problem because now we're talking about one particular design of one category of um, firearms, and so yeah, that I think that could have an impact on reducing the deaths and injuries and the few mass shootings that occur every year, which I understand is somewhere around 20 mass shootings a year. Okay, which is horrible, but when compared with the deaths and injuries in places like certain police districts in Chicago, it pales in comparison. But it also highlights, I think, the fact that if we can't find compromise between public safety and the rights of people to have as lethal a weapon as they want, then we're going to be butting heads and not finding any common ground. I mean, there has to be some common ground that we can agree to that restricts the design, manufacture, distribution, and use of these dangerous products, and recognizes the fact that we trade off individual rights in the interest of public safety all the time. So if we can't have a discussion about that, then we're stuck.
Right. No, definitely valid points, Tim.
And so to bring that current, what's it going to take? We've had an elementary school shooting, and people had a serious reaction to that, different than all the other school shootings before that, all the other mass shootings before that. Okay? Are we willing to give up, trade some tiny individual right if we all agree that it would have an impact on protecting our kids in the schools? Are we willing to do that? If so, then let's talk about that.
Right.
If that's non-negotiable, then then I think we're going to have a hard time having any common agreement.
Right. Yeah. No. So Tim, I mean, why don't we turn the conversation in a different direction? Because I mean, I think you're bringing up some really valid points, and in terms of like trying to find some compromise, what else does it really need to take past an elementary school shooting? I think that's really an interesting way to look at it. What I was going to say is, what then are some of the causes that are that you see? You've been around this topic a lot longer than I have. So what causes do you see of why there seems to be no middle ground being found? What is preventing some of these safer safer regulations from coming into play? Because obviously there are people that are screaming like, just ban guns, and then you hear people such as you who aren't saying necessarily that. You're just saying like, let's find some common ground to talk about how to make to have an impact on this conflict. So what is preventing right now those things from happening?
Well, actually, I'm encouraged since Newtown that the conversation has changed, and I'm hopeful that there can be some common ground. So I'll answer your question based on pre-Newtown, what was preventing any kind of common ground, and that was extremism on both sides. If you just go back and look at the statements and the positions and the sound bites coming out of the gun lobby, very difficult to have a conversation. And same thing from a lot of the gun safety rhetoric. It was more extreme, and attempts to reach out and have a conversation quickly degenerated into generalizing and name calling and labeling.
Really? When was
So
this? When was this that you're referring to? Can you just elaborate or be a little more specific on when this was occurring exactly? Like between what parties? Like, is there a specific time you're referring to that we should know about?
I'm referring to everything pre-Newtown. Whenever a conversation like this was had on a news program or online, there was very little practical discussion or conversation or listening, and it was simply stating positions and digging in heels and being satisfied with no change.
Really interesting. So I mean, do you think that ultimately, like, a platform such as Vonvo, where we could have, let's say, someone such as yourself, more middle ground, a pro NRA individual, and then, and then someone who's against, all guns, let's say, just total like peace activists, whatever you want to call it. I mean, do you think a forum like Vonvo could be a real place to see some discussions occur? And do you think it could have an impact on changing people's opinions or fostering some, real change on the matter?
I do. That's why I'm here. And I'm a little discouraged that it's just you and I talking.
Right.
I was hopeful that Stephen would join us because I did see some hopeful comments from him on the thread that was going on this morning. But here we are.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, not a problem. I'm sure. It's now gonna take a turn where we're gonna be trying to locate, people to speak on this matter. So I'm definitely optimistic that over the coming few days, and as soon as like next weekend, we'll have individuals to speak on it. What I was going to ask you next is when it comes to the interpretation of like the Second Amendment, and you have people who like appeared on Piers Morgan, such as like Alex Jones, like I think that was his name, saying like you're going to take away our guns, etc., etc. And he went on his rant over there. I mean, do you think that there's right now an issue regarding the interpretation of the Second Amendment, or do you think that that's just kind of like a red herring that people are, throwing on top of this fire and just kind of like getting away from what the real cause and concerns and where the focus should be?
Well, again, I'm going to have to answer your question differently based on what's happened recently compared to what it was before. So last year, the Supreme Court weighed in on the McDonald case, which was actually out of Chicago, and for the first time interpreted the Constitution to guarantee an individual right to bear arms. Up until that point, there had been 6 cases brought to the Supreme Court, and in all 6 of those cases, the court interpreted it as a collective right, not an individual right. Okay. The entire Second Amendment is very short. It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Mm-hmm.
So I interpret that as I believe the majority of constitutional scholars interpret it to be an individual right within a collective right. So the entire Second Amendment clearly refers to a well-regulated militia. So the individual right to bear arms has to have some relation to a well-regulated militia.
Right.
Now, there may be other rights as well, and that's the debate. Does that individual right include a right to self-defense, even if there is no militia involved? And that's where the discussion goes. But again, I think that that's a part of the issue that needs to be discussed and agreed upon, and constitutional lawyers will be fighting that out for years to come. But that's the current interpretation.
Right, and I mean, I think what you're saying doesn't also make it very black and white, where you're saying it's an individual right, enclosed or a part of a collective right. So it gets very sticky along
Right.
those lines. So I mean,
so when you back up and focus on, okay, how do we reduce deaths and injuries from firearms? Okay, I don't think the Second Amendment is going to help us a whole lot.
right.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually,
Actually,
go.
I like the current conversation the way it is now, because at least we have some guidance where the extreme left cannot claim that there is no individual right. Okay, at least based on the McDonald case, that claim is invalid.
Right, and
so we have to figure out how to reduce deaths and injuries from firearms without infringing on the individual right to keep and bear arms as currently interpreted.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And in the McDonald case, the justices clearly left room for safety regulation.
Really?
They clearly stated that the individual right is not an absolute right.
How long ago, Tim, was the McDonald case seen by the Supreme Court?
Last year.
Last year. So last year, and it was at that point where, they began to really drill down on the individual right, and you're saying that they left a lot of room for interpretation or room for correcting the idea of there being like more safety regulations.
Yes.
So, right.
And subsequent safety regulations have withstood the constitutional challenge. So it's not unconstitutional to regulate firearms.
But you believe, but basically, although you say that, I mean, a lot of what the pro-NRA people will say is, no, you can't do that. Like, right? They're a lot of them are very, strong in their stance of, we don't want any restrictions whatsoever.
Right. And that is not the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment.
Of their latest interpretation of it, that is.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, so basically, that because of that. 1 second, just plugging in my computer. Seeing that, that's got to be part of then, I guess, where some of your optimism comes into play, where a focus, or at least a discussion from the Supreme Court about these safety regulations would then, allow for a much further discussion to take place on how to maybe incorporate some of these safety regulations. And then at that point, I mean, right now, is it basically right now starting from the top with Obama, and then we'll trickle down? Will trickle down to the states.
Well, I don't know if it's one directional like that. I think that there will be things boiling up from the states as well as things coming down from the federal level. And, whatever works, whatever is going to have an impact on protecting our kids and reducing deaths and injuries from firearms. Mm-hmm. That's what we advocate for.
Great. So, what I was going to say is, there are obviously an abundance of other angles we can talk about relative to this subject. I know Stephen inside the room, this was the other Stephen, I believe, who is participating in that thread. He told that he wrote inside the text chat that he doesn't have a webcam, so unfortunately he couldn't join us. Stephen, who was part of the thread that was supposed to be here, I'll obviously be in touch with him, and I think what we can do is, obviously I think that there's been a bunch of really solid information that was shared here, and I think if we can, on my end, if I can put some discussions together, I'll be sure to be in touch with you, because I think that there's no doubt. What's actually also interesting is from reading that thread, I think maybe people are probably would you agree that people are probably misinterpreting what your stance is strictly through, text, but rather, hearing your perspective in person, and hearing your thoughts might result in a more direct response from some of the people who are participating in that thread, and in trying to respond to your points, right? Because I think I kind of see that now after hearing your opinion on this topic, that I think some people were kind of misinterpreting what your real thought process was on this topic.
Well, I think there's definitely a lack of understanding of both sides, and I think that it's very difficult to have the conversation and really understand each other because of the way the conversation has been going for so many years. Mm-hmm. Okay, in that thread, I was trying very hard to listen and not jump to conclusions when I saw common rhetoric that I've been hearing for years and years and years. And I have respect and faith in individuals that we can come to some agreement if we have a real conversation, because we have some common goals. We're all trying to protect our kids. We're all trying to reduce deaths and injuries and violence. So we may come at it from different angles, but when we have a common goal, there should be a way to have a conversation and find positive steps to move forward.
Great. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Tim. So, from here, I think Stephen enjoyed the conversation. It looks like Larry did as well. So, although we weren't able to have someone from the other side, share their point of view, I want you to know that I think you really did throw out some great points, that are worth really digging deep into. And so I can tell you that over the next few days, I'm pretty confident I should be able to have a few discussions set up for next weekend, and we'll get. And I mean, I think we were supposed to have the other side in this discussion, but we'll make sure I'll execute on that a little bit better for next weekend, perhaps. And thank you so much. I'll definitely be in touch. Okay, Tim?
Okay. Thanks, Max.
Thank you very much.